Yo, welcome back APUSH students. Today is how to LEQ the basics. Now before I get into this, I want to let you guys know that I will be making this into a series. Now this is just an overview of how I approach the LEQ, but throughout the year I will be dropping full essay examples and walking you through real prompts from real tests. And I'm going to be doing that for every single unit of APUSH. So if you guys want to see full real prompts, real thesis statements, real essays, then make sure you subscribe because I'm going to be coming out with those throughout the year. So there are three main prompt styles for APUSH LEQs. Technically there is a fourth, but I'm going to explain why there's really just three. Compare and contrast is the first one. It's pretty self-explanatory. An example prompt would be compare and contrast the colonies in the Chesapeake with the New England colonies. Be sure to address two of these three areas in your essay: economic, political, social. They don't always give you that last part where they assign you the certain categories that you're supposed to analyze. However, the main goal is to express the similarities and differences between what the prompt is giving you. I forgot to mention this before I move on to the next one, but I rank these in my opinion what are the easiest to the hardest. But the next one is change in continuity. An example prompt would be evaluate the extent to which the 7 Years' War, French and Indian War, marked a turning point in American relations with Great Britain, analyzing what changed and what stayed the same from the period before the war to the period after it. What this is really asking you to do is to analyze a full time period. Usually there's multiple key events within that time period. This one is really just the French and Indian War. And what you want to do is you want to point out the continuities and changes that occurred throughout that period. I will let you know that the changes are almost always more important to your essay. You really only want to focus on the continuities towards the beginning of your essay because the changes are always the part that's really going to flesh out the complexity in your essay. And then causation, evaluate how the French and Indian War impacted the relationship between Great Britain and the British colonies from 1754 to 1776. Now what this prompt is asking you to do is either analyze the causes of a great event or analyze the effects of an event. Now this one is asking you to use the French and Indian War as the main cause, and then you're going to go ahead and explain the effects of the war. But another prompt might give you the effect of something, and it might ask you, what do you think the most important cause to that effect was? Now the fourth and hidden prompt is technically called periodization, but periodization is really just asking you to analyze a certain time period, and in that, in order to get a complex essay out of that, you really want to use the change in continuity format. Even if the prompt doesn't explicitly point towards a change in continuity essay, if it gives you a time period, if it wants you to analyze a specific time period with specific events, you want to use the change in continuity format to answer that prompt. So that's why I lump in periodization with change in continuity, and I really think there's only three prompts for APUSH. Now if you notice, these three example prompts are all for Unit 1, so if you guys want to practice with these prompts, I recommend trying to maybe answer them in a couple paragraphs, or maybe make some bullet points on how you would go about these prompts. The first paragraph should be intro, contextualization, and then the thesis should be the end of that first paragraph. Intro and context is a really important part of your essay. It's really underrated. You want to write a lot in that paragraph. It might seem like too much, but trust me, it's not. You can go on for 3, 4, 5 sentences of the intro because it really sets up your essay. And then the thesis should be those last 1 to 2 sentences of that first paragraph. And then you're going to write your first and second body paragraphs. You only need 2 body paragraphs for whatever essay you're writing. You don't need 3. For the first and second body paragraphs, you either want to use one for, if it's compare and contrast, you want to do similarities and differences, or differences then similarities, depending on what's more important. And then for continuity and change, you want to do continuities and changes, or changes and continuities, depending on what's more important. But again, the changes are almost more important, so you want to use that in your second paragraph. And then I'll get into the conclusion more, but it's really just about restating your thesis and then connecting the main point of your essay to a point in the future, or explaining how it leads up to the next time period, something like that. You want to sort of have like an open-ended ending to your essay. Now this is really controversial, and I don't know how many teachers or students will agree with me, but do not waste time writing and planning like on the paper, on the prompt sheet, something like that. There is literally no point to writing a whole outline on the piece of paper before you get into the essay. It's a massive waste of time. You have to get comfortable with just jumping right into the writing a few seconds after you pick out your prompt and just thinking as you write. That's why I think the intro and context part is so important, because while you're writing that intro, while you're fleshing out the context in your head, you should be thinking about how that sets up your essay, and you should be planning the real body of the essay while you're writing that intro and your context and the thesis. I promise you that if you know the material enough, you'll be able to stare at one of the 3 prompts they give you and immediately know what you want to write about. It is totally okay to get into that first or second paragraph and not know exactly how you want to order your evidence or exactly what you want to say, but I promise you it will come to you as you're writing. Writing little bullet points and outlines on the paper before you start writing is a colossal waste of time. I think it's really bad. I know I'm kind of going in on it, but I think it's really stupid, and that's my main point. Just jump in, you're going to be fine, and it's going to lead you to make longer and better essays. And by the time you get to the end of the timing, you're only going to be adding extra stuff to your essay rather than being all flustered trying to just finish the essay. Intro and context. Context is underrated. It should be very thorough and comprehensive. I like to start most of my essays with kind of the same format. I'll go like in the 17th century, in the 18th century, or like during the French and Indian War, during the American Revolution, something like that. Or like something like at the time of the Civil War, at the time of, I don't know, some major event, something like that. These sentence starters just allow you to say a lot of things after that comma. You can just list off things. You can keep going about one specific event. You can expand on what you say at the beginning, something like that. Again, you should be using these sentence starters to write like 2, 3, 4 sentences of intro and context. You don't need a real hook, although it does make your essay sound a little bit better. You just need to set up the time period a lot. Argue relative importance. This is the massive part of your thesis and your essay as a whole. This is how you get that 6th point, that complexity point of the explanation part of the rubric. And I'm going to explain how this kind of works with this sample prompt. So this is a compare and contrast prompt. Compare the role of geography in shaping colonial economic patterns, including labor systems during the 17th century in New England and southern regions. So when I see geography, I'm thinking of the location and the climate of these two regions. And then when they explicitly mention labor systems in the prompt, I'm immediately thinking, okay, how the South started to develop slavery and how New England regions didn't really ever dive into that. And that's sort of a main difference there that I can use for my essay. So here's the thesis that I came up with. Although both the New England and southern colonial regions were similarly located near the Atlantic Ocean, allowing both to develop export economies, the differences in climate between the regions proved more important because it contributed to each region developing different industries, which became the basis for the different labor systems observed in the North and South that shaped the early United States. So you can see in the beginning part of this thesis, I point out the similarities between the two colonies, the two regions of colonies, both being towards the Atlantic Ocean, and how that meant that they were both export economies. But then I get into the differences and argue why they're more important, and the reason why I said this is because the South, because they had a warmer climate, they're able to get into the agricultural and plantation economy, and that made them develop slavery as an institution. And slavery became the basis of the tensions between the North and South, the political tensions in the early United States, and how that eventually led all the way up to the Civil War, which is way after this time period, but that's why this part is so important. And doing this what is more important part allows you to hit both the similarities and differences, both the continuities and changes, which is going to earn you that complexity point. You should literally never deviate from this format. I wrote like 15, 20 essays for my class, all in different time periods with different types of prompts, but I always did the relative importance format. I explained why one, although it did happen, why something else was more important. And that's how I was able to bang out 6 out of 6s on even essays that I thought were kind of weaker. And that's also how you're able to connect these similarities, differences, continuities, changes to an overall theme, an overarching point. And that's how you're able to connect what you're writing about to something bigger. Even if I'm not the best at explaining this, I encourage you guys to watch my essay examples when they drop, because I'm going to be really going over what this looks like in a full essay. So here's what it looks like for other prompts. For change in continuity, you should argue whether the continuities or changes are more important to the time period. And for causation, you should argue which cause or which effect is more important. The argument of importance, like I said, will guide you to the bigger picture and ultimately the complexity point for a 6 out of 6. And honestly, the LEQ, that's where you want to pick up major points on the test. You want to be getting perfect scores on the LEQ because the DBQ is difficult. And then we get into the conclusion of the essay. You should be creatively restating your thesis. You shouldn't just directly copy and paste your thesis from the first paragraph. You should try and rephrase it a little bit and maybe adjust it if it slightly kind of changed throughout your essay. And this also gives you another chance to earn the thesis point if for some reason in the first paragraph you messed up your thesis. And then you should be bringing home your argument about the importance. If you weren't able to flesh out why whatever you wrote about in the second paragraph was more important, you can continue writing about that in your conclusion. Because honestly, if you write it in the conclusion, it's easier to connect it to that bigger picture, which you're going to save for the end. So yeah, in that last part of the conclusion, you should be explaining how the important part impacted or influenced the future events beyond the current time period you are writing about. So if there's a major event coming on like right after the point where your essay ends in the time period, it's pretty easy to connect it to future events. But you can also do it to sort of broader things like cultural movements or like economic time periods. It doesn't have to be like a specific event you're connecting to. You don't even have to connect it to anything like specific. You can literally just talk about how whatever you wrote about sets up the United States for like a dangerous time period or like a flourishing period, something like that. And that's a wrap. Thanks for watching. Again, one last reminder, I'm going to be dropping essay examples throughout the year, so even if you're still a little confused on how to LEQ, I'm going to be going over essays for every single time period. So make sure you subscribe and follow along throughout the year, and goodbye. Yo, if you're super cool and awesome, you should follow my Twitter or X if you're that kind of person. It's at Clark4724. I post a lot of random stuff on there, but I also post channel updates and when my next videos are coming out, so if you're going to keep watching my channel, then I recommend you follow, and thanks.